What's going on, everybody? Josh Engleman for Awesemo.com, and I am back with my NBA DFS contenders on DraftKings for Tuesday, June 22nd. Now be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all of our other content goes live. Follow me on Twitter at Josh Engleman, only place that you can find updates to my sim results as we get closer to lock. And finally, let me know in the comments section who is your favorite and least favorite of my contenders for today's slate. We are rounding out the bottom of my top 10 with DeMarcus Cousins, Terrence Mann, Jay Crowder, Mikal Bridges, and DeAndre Ayton on the outside looking in. Who will be my favorites? My top 5 plays for today? It's time to find out. First up at number 5, somebody I definitely don't want to roster, but the salary makes it better. Rajon Rondo, $2,600, projected for 14.5. He's like optimal captain only 1% of the time, but optimal in the flex 46% of the time. That salary is just nice. I gave him 16 minutes. I think that seems pretty reasonable with Kawhi Leonard out. 0.9 fantasy points per minute, about 18% usage. And then you get this really weird little line of everything. 5 points, 2 boards, 4 assists, maybe a steal. But he's only 2,600. You don't need all that much for this to pay off. So, if you are looking to go to someone, Rondo in the playoffs looks like he's viable. Game 2, they need a big one. If he gets the minutes, and that's the biggest question, does Pat Beverly get more minutes? Do they just play Terrence Mann or Reggie Jackson even more than they were? Do they dust off Luke Kennard? That can go a bunch of different ways, but for right now, my assumption is that Rondo plays around 16 minutes, and if he does, he is very important for today's slate. As is $8,600 Reggie Jackson, who comes in the number 4 spot, projected for 33.5. He's the optimal captain 12% of the time, which blew my mind when I first saw it. 35% at the flex spot, 47% of the time Reggie Jackson is in the optimal lineup. He's playing a ton of minutes. He's looking, honestly, great. He's playing like a Reggie Jackson I never expected could. 37 minutes, 0.9 fantasy points per minute, above average usage at 22%, 19, almost 5, and almost 4. Maybe you get a stock out of Reggie Jackson, but he is the second best creator on the Clippers right now with no Kawhi Leonard. They have no choice but to rely on him. If this game stays close, I have to imagine that Reggie Jackson plays a very big role in it. North of 20 real points is very much in the cards, probably like a 45% chance of doing that. And 8,600 just isn't a problematic enough price tag given his minutes. That's why you see him showing up in the captain spot 12% of the time. I'm really curious to see what his captain ownership ends up being. I'm hoping that it ends up being oddly low, and Reggie Jackson could be my sneak captain. If I'm wrong, well, then he's not all that sneaky. Now we take a monstrous leap up, and this one gets really weird. Paul George is number 3. He's 12K, projected for almost 52 fantasy points. He's the optimal captain 31% of the time. He's in the optimal flex spot 41% of the time. That's a 73% total after rounding. Look at the gap between Paul George at 3 and Reggie Jackson at 4. We're in a completely different tier now. You can expect 2 out of the top 3 guys to be in the optimal lineup almost all of the time. 40 minutes for Paul George, 1.3 fantasy points per minute with no Kawhi Leonard, 35% usage, 30 real points, 7.5 boards, 5.5 assists, almost 2 stocks. You know what you're getting here. The problem is there's a good piece of value on the Suns that slightly outpaces him, and there's a slightly better pay-up option. Now, they're flip-flopped on FanDuel, but for here, it's a little bit different. 12K for Paul George obviously still looks good. 3/4 of the time he's in the optimal lineup. There's only 3 guys that are in it more frequently than a coin flip, so you're obviously going to Paul George a lot. It wouldn't surprise me if his captain ownership was a little bit lower here. I'm looking to load up on Paul George. And the other pay-up option doesn't make it to number 1. Devin Booker in the 2 spot, 11,800, projected for 50, 25% chance at the captain, 50% at the flex, 75% of the time he's in the optimal lineup. I have Devin Booker playing 40 minutes, 1.25 fantasy points per minute with no Chris Paul, 34% usage, 32 real points, 6.5 assists, almost 5.5 rebounds. Booker and George look very, very similar. They have very similar odds in being in the optimal. And generally speaking, you're expecting them both to be there. The Booker-George stack combo, if you want both of them in a lineup, they're going to be in the optimal half of the time that you play out this slate. That seems pretty reasonable to me. Just keep your eye on public ownership. If he's going more to the captain spot, play a little bit more in the flex, or vice versa. But either way, you're playing a lot of Paul George, you're playing a lot of Devin Booker, but you're probably playing just a bit more on Devin Booker. But who's number one? Before we get to that number one contender, one last reminder, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell so you know when everything goes live, and then head on over to Twitter and follow me at Josh Engleman. Only place you're going to get updates to my sim results as we get closer to lock. And finally, let me know, comment section underneath this video, favorite contender, least favorite contender, and the contender that you thought would be on this list that you do not see. The price tag is bailing him out here. $6,200 Campaign is the number one contender for today's slate, projected for just shy of 34. 16% of the time, he's the optimal captain, 60% at the flex, and he just nudges out Devin Booker by 1%, 76% likelihood of being in the optimal. I have him playing 31 minutes, right around 1.1 fantasy points per minute. This guy's got huge usage with Chris Paul off the floor. I've got him in for 23%. That's 16 real points, 6 assists and 3.5 boards, plus a steal and a half. Well, call it a steal and a half plus a half block. You don't expect Campaign to block a shot because he's a little guy, but you know, it could happen from time to time. Either way, Campaign being the number one contender. I didn't think that was possible with Devin Booker and Paul George picking up such a huge offensive load, but the $6,200 price tag is impossible to ignore. I like going to Payne in the captain spot. I'm very anxious to see what his projected ownership ends up looking like. But when push comes to shove, there are 3 guys that are core plays for today. Campaign, Devin Booker, Paul George. You're probably getting all 3 pretty frequently. You're getting 2 of those 3 in every single lineup that you're putting together, I would imagine. But all that matters is this. Campaign is the number one contender for today's slate. Alrighty, folks, that will do it. Those are my NBA DFS contenders on DraftKings for Tuesday, June 22nd. No process show, but the FanDuel version of this video is around here somewhere. Strategy show, 10 a.m. with Laffy. You don't want to miss it. And finally, I'm on live before lock tonight, starting at 7:45, going all the way up until 9. Be there. That's where you can get some updates to these sims. We're going to break it all down once again. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back again tomorrow morning for another edition of the Contenders.